Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. I am also the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, and if you want to find out why over 50 members have already subscribed, or 50 plus now, we're closing in closer to that 60 mark at this point in time, why they have all signed up, you can find out for a 7-day free trial. Check the link in the description below. If you enjoy breaking down fights, predicting fights, analyzing fights, and making your own breakdowns at the end of the day, the Fight Archive has you covered in terms of having all direct links to past fights for these upcoming events, not just the UFC, but a bunch of regional shows as well, so you can take full advantage of that. Check it out for free, like I said again, with a 7-day free trial, link in the description below. Quickly, right off the bat, I just want to apologize for the lack of mic. I've actually sold my mic for downgrading, roughly, if you want to call it that. If you guys remembered, I had the Shure SM7B, I think it was. A little bit too fancy for my liking, especially with the mixer I was using not working the greatest. So I've downgraded to the MV7, which is more reliable for podcasters and streamers, but I'm just waiting for it in the mail. So you guys are just going to get the shitty quality for now in terms of the audio for the rest of this week, but the next week I should have that mic ready to go, set up, and you guys can hear my voice a little bit better. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me, especially bearing with me through all the audio issues I've had over the last couple of years, trying to figure out how to master that goddamn microphone, but there was just no way for me to do so. But luckily I found a perfect solution and I am taking full advantage of it. So hopefully we can get that going next week. Another apologies in terms of the delay and tardiness of the podcast this week. I gotta be honest, guys. I was having troubles kicking myself into gear to really get the rest of this studying done. Not to mention in terms of keeping up with the Fight Archive, where we have, I believe, 5 or 6 regional events alone this week, which I'm trying to post profiles for so people can get studying on those profiles. But I was getting through fights and just not really just zoning in the way that I like to. And I don't like giving half-assed breakdowns either. I finally got through it all by Wednesday evening. I'm shooting this podcast on Thursday morning/afternoon. But I got it done. I'm still going to release the other segments as normal. You'll see the Lock of the Night and Top 3 Dog of the Night candidate videos dropping later this evening. And then the Locky 2-Step and the 3 Best Prop Bets video dropping on Friday. Also, I'll be breaking down the LFA strictly on the Patreon, so if you want to check that out, check the link in the description below. But let's get through the quick recap before we get into the breakdowns for UFC Paris. Lock of the Night prediction didn't go that great last week with me getting, what's the term? Screwed by believing in the Rolando Bedoya hype. I thought he did a decent job in that fight, but he just didn't really put together his punches the way that I expected him to. He's doing a great job with the leg kicks, but I wish he was a little bit more aggressive in terms of throwing his output. So I got Honey Dick there. So we end up losing on the Lock of the Night prediction there. We did kind of make up for it with Carlos Praches on the Contender Series this past week, but still very bitter about falling short on Bedoya. But that brings our Lock of the Night prediction record on the year to 73-23 for a 76% hit rate, which I'm still happy about. Want to get to that 80%, but 76, not that bad either. Dog of the Night kind of shit the bed again as well with Jarno Aarons. Anthony Smith was another candidate that I had and was pretty high on and should have pulled the trigger there, but I ended up going with Aarons. Really expected him to kind of get his grappling going a little bit more and thought he would be a little bit more aggressive, but Sungwoo Choi was on one. He knew his job was on the line and he was able to get the job done that night. So shout out to anybody that took the Choi favorite money there. We did kind of bounce back on the Contender Series this past week with Marco Tulio Silva going out there, not getting the contract, but still going out there and having a good enough performance that he was able to get his hand raised and we were able to cash that ticket. So our Dog of the Night prediction record now is at 39-57 for a 41% hit rate. I believe we're pretty much in the black profit-wise in terms of the Dog of the Night. If you want to get the exact record, check out the Dog of the Night candidate video that I dropped later this evening. And as I said, LFA, if you're looking for LFA 166 breakdowns, strictly on the Patreon. Link for that is in the description below. And then shout out lastly to the GodzillaWins team over there, providing me a platform to still drop written breakdowns for the public. So my main event breakdown and my 3 best moneyline bets also drop on GodzillaWins. I'll have the links to those in the description below once they've been posted. All right. Without wasting any more time, let's get right into the breakdowns. We got an 11-fight card going down from the second event that the UFC is throwing in Paris. First fight, obviously, we got a ton of French fighters sprinkled out throughout this card, and that is the case in this first fight between Zara Fairn and Jacqueline Cavalcanti. This is actually a catchweight bout of 140 pounds. I believe this is a short notice spot for Cavalcanti, hence the catchweight there. But that's going to work in the favor of Fairn, who has missed weight on her last 2 attempts, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was Fairn that missed weight. It was Jocelyn Edwards. But Fairn has had her share of issues on the scale, so I'm sure she's more than happy to only have to cut 140 pounds or to get to that 140-pound limit for this matchup. She's on a rough run right now. She's 0-3 in the UFC. She's had a bunch of fights fall out. She even had to pull out of the fights pretty late because of her weight-cutting issues. But she's going to be buoyed by the French crowd this weekend as she takes on the Portuguese, now American fighter Jacqueline Cavalcanti. Fairn, at her best, is a great range kickboxing striker. However, she had some issues trying to implement that game against Josiane Nunes last time around, who she had a 6-inch height advantage over. It was hysterical to watch, considering that it looked like something out of Pride, where we had 2 women that were just completely different sizes, but the smaller woman ended up winning because she was able to land the more impactful shots, and she did a great job in terms of being the bull that night. And Fairn was not a great matador, hence why she ended up losing that fight. But she had some decent moments in the beginning of that fight. I think that Fairn is not as bad as her 6-5 record indicates, which is why I'm kind of surprised that the line is as wide as it is here for Cavalcanti. She's making her UFC debut after coming over as the LFA bantamweight champion, and she was able to secure that title with a win over Melissa Croden earlier this year. She went the full 5 rounds that night, and she used a disciplined and tactical striking approach to hurt Croden over those 25 minutes and eventually get her hand raised, like I said, by decision. She's an opportunistic striker, and at times that makes her be a low-volume striker. I believe she will be better off faring as a grappler in this matchup, as Fairn has really struggled in that aspect of the MMA game. But more often than not, we see Cavalcanti just being patient and waiting for her moments to explode in the striking realm. And I think that could get her in trouble here. So I wouldn't be so privy in terms of jumping on the chalk-heavy spot on Cavalcanti here, no matter how bad Zara Fairn has been looking as of late. But I'm probably going to be in the minority for this one, but I'm going to go with the Fairn side here. Plus 285 for a fight that I believe is going to be very close. It's women's MMA, lower level women's MMA at this point in time as well. And if Cavalcanti wants to go out there with that slow, methodical striking approach, Fairn could absolutely put the numbers on her, right? Even though she lost the fight to Josiane Nunes, she outstruck her by 15 significant strikes. She was still in the triple digits in terms of strikes, and she could do that here against Cavalcanti, who's not as aggressive as Josiane Nunes. So she's not really giving herself many opportunities to try to get that win or to try to hurt her opponent, which is why I kind of like Fairn here. I would only take like a half-unit shot on the spot. Again, low-level women's MMA, big underdog, but the underdog that has way better experience, in my opinion, as well. So I'm going to go with Fairn to kick off the card as the underdog, and I think she gets it done via decision. Next up, we'll go over to the bantamweight division for the men's, and we're going to go with Farid Basharat going up against Clayton Rodrigues. Now, Basharat is a 10-0 prospect who has been looking exceptional throughout his UFC career thus far. He's 1-0 with that lone victory coming against Damon Blackshear, which is starting to age pretty well considering how good Blackshear has been looking as of late. But Farid, I had long said, is the lesser skilled brother in the Basharat brothers, obviously Javid being his brother. But Farid is showing off some pretty good skills. Javid looks more so to just keep fights in the striking realm, whereas Farid doesn't mind blending his wrestling behind his striking, which makes him so successful and allows him to stay safe. He has a very slick kickboxing game where he's able to touch his opponents up from distance, and then when he gets their guards high, he changes levels, gets the fights to the ground. Not only does he have a good double leg, but he also has some good trips and sneaky hip throws that he can execute in the clinch range. And I think that's going to be important for him here against a guy like Clayton Rodrigues, who's being forced up a weight class here. He was supposed to fight Tatsuro Taira earlier this year, but unfortunately missed weight, and that fight ended up being canceled. And it seems like the UFC has forced Clayton to move up a division here, which is not going to bode well for him. He's at a 2-inch height disadvantage as well as a 4-inch reach disadvantage in this matchup. And Farid does a great job in terms of establishing his range. But I think it's going to be important for him to get this fight into the clinch realm, really wear on Rodrigues, who has been known to have a gas tank issue. And then from there, I fully expect Basharat to start taking this fight to the ground and taking advantage of that cardio issue that Rodrigues has. Don't get me wrong, Rodrigues is a fun fighter, right? There was a reason he was a minus 300 favorite going into that fight against CJ Vergara, which he ended up losing. But the guy is, very dangerous in the striking realm, has some nasty jiu-jitsu, nasty striking, good power in his hands as well. But it just showcases now that as he's taking steps up in competition, it's going to get harder for him to finish guys, which ultimately brings to light his cardio issues. And I think that's going to be the case here against Farid Basharat. So I like the chalk on Basharat, if I'm being honest. If you want to hedge anything here, maybe Clayton round 1. But if this fight escapes that first round, I won't have any worries on the Farid Basharat side here. I like Basharat round 3. I think that's going to be a good spot to kind of take a sprinkle on for big plus money, but I don't mind the chalk here on Basharat either. So look for Basharat to extend his winning streak and undefeated record to 11-0 this weekend. Next up, sticking with the bantamweights, but flipping over to the genders, going over to the females, we got UFC debutante Nora Cornolle. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. She's going up against Jocelyn Edwards. This fight is kind of a pick-em with Edwards taking a little bit more money over the last couple of days, but still nothing more than minus 120. Cornolle is a very aggressive fighter. She's on a 5-fight winning streak, I believe, at this point in time. The only loss she has on her record, 6-fight winning streak. The only loss she has on her record is against the woman fighting in the first fight of the night, Jacqueline Cavalcanti. That night we saw how the aggressive style of Nora can be used against her with a fighter that is a little bit more technically savvy in terms of the striking realm. Nora likes to kind of just, blitz forward, throw big shots, likes to take fights to the ground and do some big work from on top, but she's been doing it against very low-level opponents. The last time we saw her actually deal with adversity was in her last matchup, but luckily for her, she was able to kind of knee stomp her opponent, and her opponent kind of injured herself, it seemed like, and she just called the fight off only like halfway through that first round. But for those 2.5 minutes, her opponent was landing good shots on her. There are a couple of strikes that a commentator was kind of just overblowing, in my opinion. But there were, instances where it seemed like Nora was a little bit gun shy. She was getting hit and she was just like, this is what resistance feels like. I don't really like it. And I think that's what she's going to face here in Jocelyn Edwards. Now, Nora could have success if she's looking for an aggressive grappling game, looking to take this fight to the ground. But I'm not completely sold on her ability to control opponents at the higher levels like Jocelyn Edwards. And that's kind of been the kryptonite of Edwards' game, is she's kind of struggled when fighters look for that aggressive wrestling game. But we saw some good improvements in the Lucy Purilova fight, right? Like the last round, she was able to stuff all 3 takedowns from Purilova, keep that fight in the striking realm, and utilize her distance striking, which she's kind of been known to do. She moves laterally very well. She uses her kicks very well to keep her opponents at range, and I think that's going to help her in this matchup against Nora, who's going to be looking to be aggressive and trying to close that pocket. But as Edwards starts landing more and more, that's where we'll start to see Nora start to get demoralized a bit. And I kind of question Nora's ability to go a hard 15 minutes, especially when she's getting chipped away at the entire time. So I'm going to lean with a UFC veteran here in Jocelyn Edwards. As much as I scored the Purilova fight against her last time around and still kind of bitter that I didn't get to cash that ticket, I still think that she's able to go out there, extend her winning streak to 4 here, and pull off the decision victory against Nora Cornolle. All right. Next up, we're going to move over to the welterweight division, where we got Ange Loosa going up against Rhys McKee. Ange Loosa coming in as the minus 170-ish favorite in this matchup. Picked up a big win over AJ Fletcher last time around, but I really think that was a great stylistic matchup for him, in the fact that AJ couldn't really get his wrestling going. Ange Loosa was the clearly better striker, which is kind of what he's been known for the most part. He's explosive, he's athletic, he has some good speed early in fights, but we see that productivity really start to drop off in the second and third rounds, which is where he found himself in a lot of trouble against AJ Fletcher in that second round, where he nearly got finished. I wouldn't have even been surprised if that fight ended up being scored a draw because of how close Loosa was was close to being finished. He's exchanged wins and losses over his last 5 fights, even 6 fights, I believe. He came up short against Jack Della Maddalena in the Contender Series in 2021, picked up a win over a UFC veteran on the regional scene, and then got the short notice call up against Munir Lazez. What I'm finding to be the trend here, though, is whenever Loosa fights a guy that has technically better striking, or even somebody that can compete with him in the striking or even be better than him, that's where he comes up short, right? The Jack Della Maddalena fight and the Munir Lazez fight. He couldn't get into his groove. He's fighting a guy in Rhys McKee who loves output and loves volume. There might be a little bit of a question mark on Rhys McKee's durability, but I think that if he can survive that early onslaught or survive the early advantage that Loosa will have here, we'll see McKee start to come on stronger and really push the pressure on Loosa and pull away with this fight late. And talk about a guy that had to really, kind of got screwed by the UFC a couple years ago, but luckily they're able to bring him back. But if you guys remember, he was brought in on like a week's notice against Khamzat Chimaev because Chimaev wanted to fight like twice or something in the span of a week or 2 weeks during the Fight Island days. He accepted the fight. He got finished in the first round. Can you blame the guy? He's mainly a striker. His defensive wrestling is kind of improving. But going up against Khamzat Chimaev on short notice, no bueno. That's not going to happen. That's not going to work. His next fight, he had a full training camp against Alex Morono, and those boys went to war. They combined for over 380 significant strikes landed over 15 minutes. And then the UFC cut him. Like, you got to give Rhys McKee a little bit more rope, especially considering the favor that he did for them in the Khamzat Chimaev fight before that. And the Alex Morono fight wasn't that, it wasn't like a complete wipeout. It was a great fight, back and forth fight, a war. UFC still decided to let him go, which was very unfortunate. But I'm glad that he went back to Cage Warriors, got 3 pretty solid victories where he was able to capture the welterweight title for Cage Warriors, defend it once, and now he gets called back up to the UFC, more than deserving of this opportunity as well. He's a volume striker, loves to kind of stalk his opponents, and he gets stronger as fights go on, which is why you see him getting in late finishes in rounds 3 and even round 4, I believe, was one of those wins as well. That's his style. And I feel like Loosa is just going to have trouble trying to keep up with that style, trying to keep up with the volume. And if he can get McKee out of there early, I feel like McKee really pulls away late. So, plus 450, plus 450, what am I talking about? Plus 145, plus 150 on a guy like McKee, I think is a damn good spot, especially against the guy in Loosa, who I'm still not completely sold on. So give me McKee, round 3 as well. I feel pretty good about McKee in this spot. All right, next up, we got Taylor Lapilus going up against Loughran in a bantamweight matchup. UFC debut for both guys, but Taylor Lapilus has actually been in the UFC in the past. He was 3-1 in the UFC between 2015 and 2016, and then for some reason he was let go. However, he more than proved himself after that, as he ended up going 7-1 since being released from the UFC, capturing the TKO and Aries FC titles while he was away from the UFC, and now he finds himself back. And what better event to bring him back than the UFC's second trip back to Paris? He was actually scheduled to fight on the last Paris event last year as well, but unfortunately he got injured. He was sat out for a while, and now he's back to make his second run in the UFC going. He's 31 years old. He's in his prime now. He does a great job utilizing his length and his speed and his distance striking, which usually keeps his opponents at bay. He has a great kicking game, which really allows him to, like I said, keep his opponents at bay. And he's even finished Nate Maness with kicks pretty much for 2.5 rounds, and then eventually finished him in that 3rd round with a beautiful side kick to the body. He's beaten a lot of good opponents and named opponents during this run outside the UFC as well. Josh Hill, Nate Maness, Marcos Breno, and Wilson Hayes, just to name a few of those guys. So he's been doing some pretty damn good work outside of the UFC and more than deserving of this callback. On the flip side, he's going up against Cage Warriors bantamweight champion Loughran, a fighter with a huge following in Ireland, and you should have seen the scenes when he went out there and got the victory last time around to capture the Cage Warriors title. He trains at a Team Calban, which was mainly known for Darren Till, but also his wrestling coach is Mike Grundy, and that's usually the style that you see him imply or implement in his fights. He's great in terms of just taking his opponents to the ground and doing big work from on top. He's finished all but one of his opponents. That's 7 finishes that he has on his record. He's only 27 years old, and it seems like his striking is improving too. The one knock I'd say on him is his kind of lack of speed in the striking round, but he makes up for it with pressure and combinations. So even if it's not that first or second shot that hits you, the third one will. And he keeps a nice high tight guard, which really allows him to protect his chin and prolong his durability throughout fights. I think he just needed a little bit more grooming on the regional scene before making the jump, though. That's where I feel like he's going to kind of struggle here against a guy like Taylor Lapilus, who is going to be a little bit too fast for him, right? I have concerns about Lapilus's takedown defense, but I think that he does a good enough job in terms of working back to his feet and then landing good enough damage of his own to make it look good enough for the judges or eventually get a finish of his own, just as he did in the Josh Hill fight and a couple of other fights where opponents, Wilson Hayes, all guys who were trying to grapple him, but he was able to outstrike them and do good work of his own. Cowlin looks very promising. He looks like he could be a top-level prospect. However, I think this is too much for him too soon. His originally scheduled opponent probably was a better matchup for him, but now going up against a veteran like Taylor Lapilus, who has seen guys like Howland in the past, I don't think that this is the greatest matchup for him. So I'm going to go with the Frenchman here. I'm going to go with Taylor Lapilus to get his hand raised, and I think he gets it done via... I want to say KO. I think that the speed advantage for Lapilus will be too much for Cowlin, and we haven't really seen Cowlin go late, and I have some question marks about his cardio. So I'm going to go with Lapilus by KO. I think he stops the Irishman here and gets his hand raised. All right, next up, probably the most anticipated UFC debut, at least for Frenchmen. We got Morgan Charriere going up against Manolo Zecchini in the featherweight division. Now, Charriere is on a 3-fight winning streak, but he was at the peak of his hype in 2020 when he captured the title. I believe he beat Steve Amable that night. He won the featherweight Cage Warriors champion, and everybody was talking about him. He seemed like the next big thing out of Cage Warriors. Then he went on to lose his next 2 fights. The 2 issues that he had in those fights was the fact that he slowed down drastically late in those fights, and his opponents were really able to take over. He's won 3 straight fights since then, but the lack of competition in those fights, not really the greatest. He's a low-level striker with some decent power and some, good accuracy, but he also does a lot of great work when he's able to take his opponents to the ground. The spots that he is most effective in is when he is actually able to set the pace. If opponents allow him to set the pace, then he can just kind of go at his own pace. He doesn't have to worry about his cardio, and he can just kind of just throw his output when he needs to. And that's where I think he's going to really struggle fighting guys that won't let him dictate the pace. But luckily, the UFC has matched it up correctly here with an Italian fighter who isn't really anything special. He looks to be a striker, he has some decent power, but he doesn't have the greatest takedown defense. And that's where I think that Charriere is going to be able to really take over and really take advantage of a guy like Zecchini. So I like Charriere here. I think that Charriere will, I'm not huge on his money line. I might throw him in a parlay or two, but I just have issues about his cardio and how he looks late in fights. But I feel like the UFC is doing him the perfect layup here. They're lobbing him the ball so that he can go out there and get a big win in front of his hometown crowd. So I'm going to go with Charriere. He could either finish this fight on the ground or win by decision. This is a perfect matchup for him. If he fumbles this one, one thing that I said in my Patreon breakdown was that I felt like he is similar to Paddy Pimblett in the fact that his hype far surpasses his talent. This guy's 18-9-1. He's more hype than anything. He is talented, don't get me wrong, but I think that people are going to kind of get blinded by the amount of hype that he has and assume that he's just this mega superstar who's going to burst onto the scene and just take over the featherweight division. He's 27 years old, so he still has the potential to improve and get better, but I just don't know if it's going to be to the level to where he's going to crack the top 10 in the UFC's featherweight division, which is talent-rich and going to be tough for him to crack. But I think he wins this fight. This is a layup. He should get it done. I'm going to say by decision. Next up, we got in another fight in the featherweight division where we got William Gomis going up against Ghemmouri. Gomis, 2-0 on the UFC so far, made a successful UFC debut last September where he was able to beat Jarno Aarons over 15 minutes, and then earlier this year spring the upset against Francis Marshall, a fight where he had a great first 2 rounds, utilizing his footwork and his long-range weapons to keep Marshall on the outside, and then Marshall was finally able to bite down on the mouthpiece in the 3rd round, get this fight to the ground, and do some good work from on top. But unfortunately for him, it was too little too late at that point in time. Gomis normally uses that type of approach in his fights on the regional scene, where he looks to smother his opponents, get them to the ground, and do good damage from on top. But he also has a stand-up background, which is where you see the kicks and his long-range weapons really come into play. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him utilize his grappling this time around to overwhelm his opponent, to take him to the ground and grind him out. Yanis, not a fighter that jumps off the page to me. He has a good record of 12-1. Seems to have a good striking game. He's on a 9-fight winning streak. Grappling game, not the greatest. He's had some close fights as of late as well. Nothing crazy about the kid. I've seen some other folks a little bit higher on him than I am myself, but this fight is a pass for me all in all. You have a guy in Gomis who goes from a plus 200 underdog, springs the upset, and now finds him as the minus 225, minus 250 favorite. That usually doesn't really sit too right with me, right? Like, you can't jump on something that's such a market overcorrection, no matter who his opponent is. And Yanis is a guy that's still a bit of a question mark. What if he is ready for the step up to the UFC? And what if this is a good matchup for him against Gomis? So I'm going to go with Gomis. Again, over 2.5, probably the best way to go about this fight, but I'm going to pick Gomis to win it by decision. All right, next up, we're going to move over to the light heavyweight division where we got Volkan Oezdemir going up against Bogdan Guskov. Guskov coming in on short notice here, but this is a guy that's on a 4-fight winning streak with all 4 of those wins coming in the first round. The majority of his wins, all coming in the first round. 11 of his 14 victories have come in the first round. But it seems like when he fights guys that are able to give him some resistance, that's where he's not as intimidating or successful. That's where his opponent Vasilevsky was able to kind of take advantage of that, hurt him badly, and then finish him in the first round. He's a power puncher. He's a slugger. He's a brawler. He's a guy that wants to go out there and try to get the knockout. So violence is probably the best way to go in this fight, especially against a guy in Volkan Oezdemir, who we know throws with a lot of power as well. It's been a long time since he's actually recorded a knockout. It's been about 4 years since we've seen him knock somebody out, but then he's going up against high-level guys, right? Alexander Rakic, Yuri Prohaska, Magomed Ankalaev, Paul Craig, a fight that was very weird because Paul Craig kept trying to pull guard, so it was hard for Oezdemir to land really big shots on him. And then obviously the Nikita Krylov fight where he got completely outgrinded that night. I think we'll see Volkan Oezdemir use a combination of his leg kicking game to slow down Guskov and then really start to unload with the strikes, where he should be able to find that no-time power again and finish this matchup probably within the first 10 minutes of this fight. I'm going to pick Oezdemir, power, huge experience advantage, and I think we'll see a very pissed off version of him coming into this fight, especially considering how his last fight went. All right, moving over to the lightweight division. We got a great grappling matchup here, potentially a grappling matchup, right? When we get 2 grapplers together, sometimes we get a striking contest. We got Benoit Saint-Denis going up against Thiago Moises in the lightweight division. This is a fun matchup, especially for Saint-Denis, who's on a 3-fight winning streak since his ill-fated UFC debut, where he got completely pulverized by Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. Saint-Denis has looked spectacular in that time during this 3-fight winning streak by pulling off 2 submissions and a knockout over his last 3 fights. He's very aggressive with his grappling. His striking game is pretty much, he fights from the southpaw position, which usually leaves the body of his opponent open. So he just rips body kicks over and over and over again until he's able to find that opening to take these guys to the ground. I was very impressed with his ability to finish Ismael Bonfim the way that he was, but that's just a testament to how aggressive and dangerous he is when he gets fights into the grappling realm. But a guy that's going to be welcoming that type of approach is Thiago Moises. Is a guy who is 28 years old, on a 2-fight winning streak of his own where he's finished both of his last 2 opponents, but a guy that wants to go out there and prove that he can fight guys that have that aggressive approach, like when he came up short against Joel Alvarez. I think he has a point that he wants to prove in this matchup. He's a high-level BJJ black belt, so I fully expect him to be prepared for that grapple-heavy approach from Saint-Denis. And then in terms of the striking realm, I think Thiago Moises is the better striker. I think the first round is going to be a very close fight, but I feel like in the second and third rounds, we'll be able to make use of that plus money that we're going to get on Moises. As long as he doesn't get finished early, which, again, Saint-Denis is possible. But if Moises showcases his veteran skill set here, showcases the level of competition and opponents he's faced in the past and what he's been able to endure, he should be able to pull away with this fight late and maybe even find a finish of his own in the latter half of this fight. My ultimate prediction is going to be Moises by decision, but I like the plus money in the underdog spot here on Thiago Moises to upset the Frenchman in his hometown. All right, moving on to the co-main event, one that I feel like should be talked about more, but it's really not. We got Fiorot welcoming Rose Namajunas to the flyweight division. Fiorot has been unstoppable since she lost her first fight, her first ever professional fight, which is when she was primarily a striker going up against the grappler in Leah McCord. But since then, she's very much evolved her game and done a great job in terms of stopping takedowns that are coming her way and doing a great job in terms of getting back to her feet and letting off strikes of her own. She has an 83% takedown defense rate. The only person that was able to take her down in the UFC was Jennifer Maia, and she was only able to enjoy about 30 seconds of control before Fiorot was able to get back to the feet and get back to her striking game. That's her style. She utilizes kind of like I want to say karate-ish type stance where she's kind of bouncing in and out and then utilizes a barrage of strikes and then gets back out to distance. It's very difficult for opponents to deal with the power in which she's throwing with, and two, the volume in which she's throwing with as well, because it just meshes together so well. Her footwork is kind of hard to get a beat on as well. Her opponent, Rose Namajunas, is obviously coming off of her title-losing fight against Carla Esparza last year. Very lackadaisical fight. A fight where she thought she won, but it was, nothing happened in that fight. They combined for a total of 67 significant strikes landed over 25 minutes. And just for a comparison's sake, the fight before that, when she went 25 minutes with Zhang Weili, they combined for 170 significant strikes. That's how low level of fight the Carla Esparza fight was. So any little thing kind of swayed it the other way. And luckily for Esparza, she was the one able to get her hand raised that night. I'm going to lean with Fiorot here. She's going to have a 2-inch height advantage, just an inch reach advantage. But I think it's mainly the power in which she throws and her comfortability in the striking realm. Rose is pretty good with her striking too, but the big kind of caveat with her has been her mental. She's a wild card. She either comes out looking like the best women's fighter in the world, or she comes out there and just lays a goose egg like she did against Carla Esparza. But I think this, stylistically speaking, is a difficult matchup for her. I think she's going to struggle to, try to take Fiorot down. Obviously, her jiu-jitsu is far better than what Fiorot brings to the table, but it's going to be hard to get your jiu-jitsu going if you can't get the fight to the ground. And I think that's where Rose is going to struggle. I don't think this weight change is a positive thing for Rose. I think she's much more suited for 115 pounds, and I think that Fiorot will do a good enough job in terms of staying at distance, letting her power go, and letting the more significant strikes land. I don't have a boatload of confidence in Fiorot here because obviously the experience advantage is in the favor of Rose Namajunas. But I think that Fiorot is on a streak. Momentum is on her side right now, and I think she's been looking career best, and this is her moment to pick up the biggest win of her UFC career and most likely earn a flyweight title shot. So give me Fiorot by decision. All right, main event time. Heavyweight division. The hometown kid, Cyril Gane, has another opportunity to pick up his second win under the UFC banner in Paris. He's going up against Sergey Spivac, who is absolutely streaking right now. He has a 3-fight winning streak going. This is Spivac. 3-fight winning streak, but he's also 7-1 over his last 8 fights. He's been able to finish Greg Hardy, Augusto Sakai, and Derek Lewis over his last 3 fights. And he's been showcasing that he's getting better in terms of timing his takedowns and really putting the hurting on his opponents from that top position. His striking is slowly coming along, but he's still a little bit slow and plodding in that realm, which is where Gane could potentially have success. He is one of the best strikers that we've seen in the heavyweight division in a long time. His ability to traverse the cage, cut angles, and utilize combinations has really stifled opponents in the past. But the big red flag that's been shown over his last 3 fights is his takedown defense and his lack of kind of resistance off of his back. Obviously, I'm sure that's something that he's been working on throughout this camp and even leading up to the John Jones fight that he had last time around. But I don't know if it's enough for him to overcome what Sergey Spivac is going to be able to do. Spivac is a solid wrestler, and he has even better control when he's able to get that takedown. Obviously, I like violence here the most in this matchup. I'm expecting whoever wins to get their hand raised by knockout or by submission. Obviously, knockout for Gane, submission for Spivac. But I'm going to lean with the grappler. It's hard for me to really get on the Cyril Gane train, especially at chalk, when he's going up against a legit grappler. Until we see those legitimate improvements made in his game, I can't truly back him in a spot where I feel like he's going to get out grappled. Like, yes, he has a tremendous advantage against Spivac in the striking realm. But for how long is he going to be able to keep that distance and keep his striking going until Spivac is able to successfully close the distance and get this fight to the ground? Which, again, like, I don't mind the plus money on Spivac. I kind of like the chalk on the fight doesn't go to decision. Minus 350, minus 400, parlay piece, whatever you want to call it. But I think that Spivac is worth a little bit of dog shot here. I expect him to get Cyril to the ground and probably have this fight wrapped up within 3 rounds. But if he's not able to, if it stays a striking battle, Gane is going to chip away at him. And he's not a one-punch knockout kind of guy like Tom Aspinall was when he was able to finish Spivac. That's why I think that we have more opportunities for Spivac to eventually get this to the ground. Is he doesn't have to worry about that one punch that's going to send him flying to the ground. It's that death by 1,000 cuts from Cyril Gane, which is how he put away Tai Tuivasa, how he put away guys like Derek Lewis. He can do that to Spivac too, but it's going to take him 3-4 rounds to do that. And in that amount of time, I have to believe that Spivac can successfully get this fight to the ground, do good damage from on top, and eventually open up like an arm triangle choke or something for himself. So give me Spivac. Spivac by sub. Fight doesn't go to decision, my favorite spot, but I think that Spivac wins this fight with his grappling. There you guys go. Breakdowns on all 11 fights for UFC Paris. Again, I apologize for the lack of audio quality. I also noticed that it seems like the timing of the mic and the cam is off as well. That's just another issue that I got to deal with in terms of this current setup that I have. But once I got the mic set up next week, everything should be back to normal. I'm sure you guys are just glad to get the breakdowns, get my analysis on these fights, and you will bear with the lack of production quality that I have on this week's content for you guys. I did ramble on a little bit longer than I normally do. Again, I try to aim for that 30-minute mark, which I'll try to get back to next week. But I'm also thinking of doing something else, and I would love to hear the opinion for anybody that's made it this far in the podcast. I'm thinking of doing like this regular breakdown, which probably reaches 45 to 50 minutes, where I go in depth, and then I release a 10-minute breakdown of quick picks, just straight to the point. For example, the Cyril Gane versus Sergey Spivac fight. Spivac has a tremendous grappling advantage, wrestling advantage. He should be able to take this fight to the ground, evade the big shots of Cyril Gane, look to get the submission or a TKO stoppage from on top. Sergey Spivac is the pick. Like something that quick. Just 2 separate videos. If you want more in-depth breakdowns, I'd point people to the full MMA Lockcast episodes. But anybody that just wants the quick picks, I'd do like a 8 to 10 minute video where I just rifle through all the picks real quick with my main driving point in terms of why I think they win their fights. Let me know what you guys think about that, and if you would enjoy having those 2 different types of segments. I may end up doing it anyway because I know a lot of people have a short attention span. But whatever, we'll see how it is. Again, if you want LFA breakdowns, check the Patreon link in the description below, and I will see you guys a whole lot over the next 48 hours as I drop 4 more segments for you guys for this UFC Paris card. All right, hopefully you guys enjoy. Drop a like and subscribe below, and I'll see you guys in a couple hours. Peace.
Last thing.